Well, good morning, members. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee on the 15th of January. Welcome, Happy New Year to you all. Some say it's Blue Monday, but I'm sure none of you are blue to be here, are you? Because it's very exciting on Audit. Hope you all agree. We've got a relatively light agenda, but some important issues nonetheless. Okay. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
An apology for absence received from Councillor Susan Cocking. Thank you.
Thank you. We've also got a number of members who are not here. Aidan Dunn, Sean Kramer and Jonathan Mayer are unavailable due to other engagements. Obviously, there's nothing particularly on there that would relate to them on this particular meeting, so that is acceptable, I believe, in this circumstance. I should introduce myself, Richard Biggs, and if you could all introduce yourself the first time you speak, that would be useful for anyone watching online as well. And obviously keep all your devices on silent, including your laptops, if you could reduce the volume so we don't get messages popping up all the time, that would be useful. So the first item on the agenda is the previous minutes for the last meeting, which was on the 13th of November. I have no issues with those. Are you happy that I sign those off, please? Thank you. The next item is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest from anyone here? Nope. And public participation, item 4. Do we have any questions? We don't. We do have a question from, it wasn't really a question, it's a statement. I'm going to allow it, but it is pushing the boundaries a bit because I don't think it's particularly relevant. It's very broad. But the question is, which is really a statement, okay, is my concerns are the very poorest in our Dorset community, the people that are reliant on food banks and the families that are struggling to get by with the need for decent housing. With the proposed tax increase, it's going to be very difficult for our communities to get by. It sounds right and proper to have more community-based alternatives in the budget. So that's the end of the statement. You can make what you wish of that. Indeed. Before I move on, I'd also like to, I think it's an important moment regarding the accounts and external audit. We have got Ian House, who I didn't recognise because it's been such a while we've seen you in the flesh, to apologise. He's sat there. And Heather Lappin, would you like to make a comment firstly on the 2021 sign off, please?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the 2021 audit, the Dorset Council and Pension Fund audit is nearing completion, with the accounts with the Deloitte technical team to review the updated format for the cash flow. The expectation that for this audit will be completed in the next few weeks. The value for money report will then follow, and we're not aware of any concerns in relation to this. For the 21-22 audit, the Deloitte audit team are currently undertaking the audit for the 21-22 Dorset Council and Pension Fund accounts. The expectation is that these accounts and audit will be coming to the March Audit and Governance Committee. The audit is progressing well, with no concerns being raised at the present time. For the 22-23 audit, the committee be aware that there was a delay to the accounts due to the issues regarding asset valuations. The accounts have now been completed and are published on our website, and we are currently in the inspection period, which is being published. At the present time, we're not certain when these accounts will be audited. I will leave Ian House from Deloitte to explain more about this, and perhaps can come back to discuss any implications of the accounts not being signed off. For the 23-24 audit, we are obviously preparing to close down the final accounts, and the new contract for external audit starts with this audit, with our new auditors being Grant Thornton. We are in discussion with Grant Thornton about the timing of the audit and the audit plan is expected to come to the April Audit and Governance Committee.
Thank you very much. I have some questions, but do you wish to comment first, Mr. House?
Thank you, Chair. I would just concur with Heather's view. We expect to sign the 2021 accounts by the end of January and then move forward with 21-22 by the end of March, and grateful for the rearrangement of the committee to allow us the most time in March to do that. It's very helpful, and that's when I expect to complete those. 22-23 is a bit more complicated given where the legislation is. There is a proposal from government which is yet to be released around a potential backstop, i.e. a date at which point auditors stop working on old audits in order that the most assurance possible can be gained as quickly as possible on the more current work and the more current accounts. Depending on what happens with that will depend on exactly how much or whether we complete all of the 22-23 accounts before the 23-24 audit starts. If we're not able to complete those accounts, then we will work with the incoming auditors to make sure they get as much assurance as possible from the work we undertake in order to minimise any impact on the 23-24 accounts.
Thank you. I mean, it is a national issue, I do recognise, but it is frustrating nonetheless. We obviously want these done as soon as possible. I have a number of questions, some of which you you touched on in your remarks, Ian, but perhaps I'll do them in order. So number one, please can you provide an overview of each strand of work on the 21-22 audit plan and the status thereof? I'll do that firstly.
Yes, we are well progressed with that audit. We've completed all of the planning procedures and they're going through our review at the moment. A lot of the detailed testing has been undertaken. One of the delays was around the property asset valuations and gaining access to the valuer. I'm pleased to say that that has now been resolved. Working very closely with officers, we're now in regular contact with the valuers so as they can answer our questions in relation to the valuation of the operational assets of the council. So the audit is progressing well, and at the moment we're on track for the end of March.
Thank you, because I know property valuations was the key sticking point, and that's been a national issue as well. So looking at the 22-23 accounts, you note the consultation on the backstop is yet to be announced, as you mentioned. What assurances can you provide the committee that Deloitte is sufficiently resourced to deliver their contractual obligations, please?
I think it is very difficult to say at this point in time whether we will be able to complete the 22-23 audit. Along with a number of other providers across the sector, we will be doing our best to give as much assurance as possible on 22-23. But depending on what that date is, will depend on how much we're able to achieve in that time, regardless of the resource available to us. It is specialist resource that is used for this work because the local authority accounts are quite different to any set of company accounts that we might audit. So it's not easy for us to pull resource from our corporate teams to help deliver these audits. We are prioritising with those councils that are really keen to complete their 22-23 audits. You are one of the most keen of those that we work with to get that done, and therefore you will be a priority for the resource that's available. It's just whether there's sufficient resource in the time that we're given, and we don't actually know at this point what that time frame looks like.
Okay, so we note the doubt there, so I think that's a bit of a concern. Well, I think quite a lot of concern there. And finally, further to the previous question, I'd like to know how many staff you have actually allocated to the Dorset audit full-time for 21-22, and how many clients you'll be working with for the 22-23 audit.
I'll try and take those in order. At the moment, we've got 5 people working on the audit. Some of that is just the final completion points for 2021, but very little of that. Most of the resources dedicated to 21-22. They are now booked over the next few months to get to the end of March. That will go up and down slightly depending on leave and other things that happen during that period, but broadly 5 people working on it at any one time. Personally, I don't expect to be working on any other councils for 22-23. I'm still finishing work in relation to prior years in relation to another unitary council, but I also have clients across the NHS, which takes some of my time as well.
Thank you. I was going to open it to questions. Councillor Batstone.
Is there anything that we need as a council to be doing that will actually speed up the process from our perspective to help you?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a very helpful question, but I would say we have great cooperation with officers in terms of it. The one thing that was a sticking point was the property valuation and access to the valuer, which they've helped us unlock. And they've committed to a weekly call with that valuer to make sure that there's no hold up in relation to those issues. So I believe we're getting the cooperation we need. It is just, some of it is incredibly technical, and the guidance is lacking in many areas like infrastructure assets, which has been an issue for a while now.
You happy with that, Councillor Batstone? Yeah. Are there any other questions around the room? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming down. I believe you came down from Cardiff, especially for this. I know that's something that we've been requested, that we do appreciate an in-person visit if possible. And that is really useful, so thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the subcommittee. Obviously, there was one last week. The minutes of those, I believe, are not yet agreed, so they will be at the next meeting, so we have no minutes to present for you today, which takes us on swiftly to the risk management update. So are you going to lead on that, Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. I'm Mark Hare, I'm the Service Manager for Assurance. I'd just like to start off this item by introducing Chris Swain. Chris is sat to my right. Chris started at the Council at the beginning of December, and he's come in as our new Risk Management and Reporting Officer. So with his appointment, the risk management function has now moved across from my own assurance service into the Business Intelligence and Performance Service. And the service lead there, David Bonner, is sat to my left. This move is going to enable greater alignment with the performance management framework, and it will also mean we have the benefit of the business intelligence business partners who will be closely linked in with individual directorate management teams, so hopefully help to really embed risk management more strongly across the organisation. I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming Chris. I will, however, just front this report for the final time. So I previously mentioned when reporting to committee that we've been without a dedicated risk management resource since June 2023. And as you would have seen in the last couple of reports, that had led to quite a significant slippage in terms of risk reviews. As at 27th of December, when the report was issued, we were showing that 58% of risks were overdue review. Chris has already started to make his mark, linking in with risk owners, and as of today, that number's reduced down to 44%. So there's obviously still some way to go, but hopefully the committee will be assured that this will start moving in a positive direction quite quickly. The report also identifies a number of actions that follow from the SWAP internal audit. With the dedicated resource now in place, we can start to move forward with implementation. There's a number of things included within those actions. That includes a review of the Council's risk appetite, which we'd look to commence following the May elections, and that would then prompt changes to our current risk scoring model. Other areas of focus will include training and enabling a process of peer challenge to ensure that a consistent approach to risk scoring is applied and provide challenge on the effectiveness of controls. So just a final point, as we usually mention when presenting this report, the actual scrutiny of the risks themselves rests with scrutiny committees as a responsibility, but as always you will see from the report, the headings are the 4 highest ranked risks based on risk owner scoring. So happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. You've got Mr. Roach.
Hello, Simon Roach, Cooperative Member. Hi. When I had a look at the risks that sit in the top right-hand corner, there's about 25 of them that have, a very high likelihood and a major or catastrophic impact to the council. So that's a significant number, 25 in that top right-hand corner. And if I then have a look at some of the risk action, the risk register, and some of the actions are not quite there, some of the dates aren't quite there, some of the owners aren't quite there. And I would have thought for those risks that sit in the top right-hand quadrant of that risk matrix, that actually those areas would have been materially prioritised, and we would have that level of detail. So I wonder if I could ask what's happening to really get those crystallised in terms of understanding the risk and having very clear action plans with accountable owners with timeframes that are not too distant in the future.
Thank you very much for the question, and I think it's a really fair point. I think there's a couple of points that I'd want to make, and then perhaps I'll just open up if colleagues either side of me have any additional points to make. I think one of the things that I mentioned is an overdue action is our review of our risk appetite. I think probably there, with the way that it's currently scheduled, there is more showing up in that high area than I think is probably realistically as high a risk as it indicates. So that review of the risk appetite would reschedule that. I think the other side of it, we have had, as I say, sort of a gap in risk resource in that we haven't really had anyone following those points up. With Chris now in post, that will enable that sort of link in with both individual risk owners and also the various directorate management teams. The other real rationale for the move across was where risk has historically sort of been one person driving it forward. And whilst Chris is the only risk management reporting officer, we've now sort of linking in with the business intelligence team. We have the benefit of business partners that actually sit within the directorate management team. So that can help to keep the pressure on individual services to make sure that those risks are being reviewed on a regular basis. And also to ensure that any new areas of risk that are being recognised by those management teams are captured at an early stage and fed back through into the system. So I think it's a really fair point. I think it shows that we've come some way in terms of embedding risk management. There's still a lot to do, but I think hopefully we're moving in the right direction with that.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Roach?
Just one follow-up, if I may. So just in terms of the prioritisation of getting the working with the individual risk owners and getting clarity on those details then, can you just outline sort of how you prioritise that? Is it based upon the current sort of risk assessment at the moment? So will you start sort of top right and work down to the bottom left?
So historically, the way that the risk reviews have been undertaken is that anything shown as either extreme or high should be reviewed within on a quarterly basis. I'd say because of we've not necessarily had to sort of the support to be able to do that on a regular basis, and it's been largely driven on a self-service type arrangement by the risk owners. I think probably sort of some of the key things are focusing in with those directorate management teams and really pulling out those high risks in those discussions. Some of them will be ones where the actual individual risk owners would focus be with them. Others are more of a sort of collective responsibility across these directorate management teams. So that was sort of a long-winded way of saying, yeah, essentially that would the first thing is to sort of bottom out those highest ranked risks and then move downwards from there. But that'll be the process for doing so. And I think in doing that as well, it will provide that challenge across the piece as to whether everything that's currently showing as high is correct. So I mentioned when talking a bit about the outcomes from the swap audit, part of the focus there was that perhaps different directorates, whilst we had one overall scoring mechanism, different directorates would utilise that in a slightly different way. So it wasn't sort of a consistent approach. So one of the actions was to try and look at some sort of peer review across the piece so that we get other directorates challenging what another directorate has done to try and come up with a consistent modelling. Okay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Legg from Sherborne Rural. Just picking up the point that Mr. Roach has made, I'm slightly concerned that that we're not actually getting what you've called the risk owners to get on top of this. I mean, it's all very well to say, well, we've been waiting to appoint somebody, but the risk owners should have been all over this like a rash, really. I mean, I went back and looked at the September figures when you reported to committee. Overall, the number overdue at that time was 14%. Now, it's encouraging to think that we've gone down from 58 to 44, but we're a long way off where we were in September. Corporately, in September, we were 10% overdue, and we're now 42% overdue. And in place services, we were 12% overdue in September, and now we're 77% overdue. And in particular, just looking at the corporate services one, the two quite high, well, not just quite high risks, catastrophic and in the likely and certain category, or rather, sorry, the possible and likely category, which are risks 286 and 348, which is the loss of IT service or data through a cyber attack, and a risk to business continuity as a result of delayed ICT recovery. One of the news items on the radio this morning is that the British Library, after 2.5 months, have just got their catalogue back online. Now, I think the risk of a cyber attack on local authorities or on the NHS or other corporate bodies in this country is very high, and we ought to be doing something about it. So what are the risk owners of this authority in ICT doing about it? They ought to be doing something about it today and every day until it's fixed.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think actually you're quite correct in terms of the drop of the reviews, and actually it had at one point got to about sort of 89–90%. So we've actually driven it down quite a bit already. But I think you're quite right. The ownership does rest with individual risk owners. If just referencing the ICT risks in particular, I know already that's one that Chris has been discussing with the various risk owners there. So it backs up the comment from colleague over here earlier on around these sort of hands-on discussions with individual risk owners. So I'm sort of confident that is happening. But I think you're quite right. It is a risk owner responsibility. We do what we can to reinforce that back with the individual service areas, and we'll continue to do that. So I think actually having those business partners embedded into these directorate management teams will also help there to really reinforce that.
Can I just return on that point? I mean, I hate to sound like Mr. Grumpy turning up on January, but can a directive be sent out from this committee to ICT to get on with it? It's all very well for colleagues in the authority to have conversations with one another and to say you ought to be spending more time on this. But unless this committee actually sends out a very clear message on, particularly on the dangers of cyber attack and the loss of data and the considerable effect that would have on the operation of the authority if it ever happened, I think we need to be clear that we elected members are sending a message that this is the highest possible priority.
I mean, I do note that, Councillor Legg, I would say some 2 years ago when I did question why this is so high, and it is the same in Fire Authority and various other organisations. I did go to a conference in London for the councils to really get my head around the issue, and it is nationally a real worry. And I think it's the case, when I came back, I did a sort of in-depth discussion with officers dealing with it, and I came to the conclusion very satisfied that they were doing an awful lot, actually. Probably the weakest link is probably members and how they access it is why you do the training and why it's really important. Passport control and what you use your laptops for, the weakest link and subcontractors, etc. But we don't want to get into the detail. That's not what we're here. But I felt satisfied that, you know, it's one of those risks that unless something changes, you know, those external forces are there. It's not going to go down. What we need to be assured of, that it's reviewed regularly. And that's really important while we've got the levels of review on here, because some, as you pointed out, are pretty good, you know, 20% are behind. When you go to Place Directorate, it's 77% are overdue, you know, and that's not acceptable. So I think that's the really strong message, because as long as they're reviewed correctly, then that's the important thing. But I think if members need detailed assurance about, or the assurance that it's being managed properly, then that's something we could ask for more information. Perhaps you'd like to go into that, Mark.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've just been talking really about I mean, that is also part of the rationale for the move, is that it sort of embeds it within that performance management framework as well. So in terms of sort of ensuring that, you know, we've got that sort of consistent process of review that will happen through there. The other point I just quickly wanted to point up on was just, I mean, from my own perspective, whilst that risk is showing, those two ICT risks are showing as overdue, like yourself, Chair, I've got every confidence in the controls that actually are in place. I'm, with one of my other hats on, I head up the emergency planning team, so obviously we're very linked in with the cyber threat from that bit of work, and I'm conscious of a lot of work that's underway in that respect. So I think in some cases it's a matter of ensuring that the risk owners are reflecting regularly within those reviews some of those, providing that sort of assurance that work is underway, and confirming that work is underway in the background. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Batstone first.
Thank you. I thank you for the assurance you've given us, but I support my colleagues' comments about the concerns, the enormity of this, very aware that we are trying to protect ourselves from a range of cyber attacks from organisations and countries that are very powerful and have an amazing range of resources. So every sympathy with our officers for attempting to counter the threat, and support your comment about we recognise the enormity of the threat, and I'm sure so do your officers.
Councillor Christopher.
Good morning, Chair. As ever, I will cover various areas. Of course, in life, you never know what's going to happen. And clearly, we, as councillors, moving towards Grant Thornton, many of us will have picked up that last Thursday in the Financial Times, there was mention of the leader of Grant Thornton quitting. So there's always surprises in life, and life is about risk. But it does occur to me, as the councillor for the Marshwood Vale ward, I am very much alive to risk because of what is happening next door in Somerset. Now, I have been critical about the fact that the external auditors haven't been able to provide timely figures and the nature of their fees, etc. But the point is, if I can specifically deal with my part of the Dorset Council and the Marshwood Vale ward, I'm already receiving emails from residents in the Marshwood Vale ward who use services and who reasonably will use services in Somerset because their closest towns are, for instance, Chard and Crewkerne, and there is a concern about the withdrawal of discretionary services. Clearly, if you live in the northern part of the Marshwood Vale and you live closest to Crewkerne and Chard, you will use services in Somerset, and that is the great risk, i.e. that some of our residents within the council area are going to be in a very difficult position because of what's happening in Liberal Democrat-controlled Somerset. There are huge risks. I don't want to go on too long in relation to housing. It is encouraging that house building figures have actually grown with Persimmon, etc., selling more houses than were thought. But with our ageing economy, ageing population, I have to stress that that is the greatest risk. We can talk about computers, we can talk about ICT failure. Everybody's talking about computers because of Horizon, but the great risk is a lack of a labour force.
I note that point. I do remind members that we are not a political committee and we try and avoid at all costs, but I note your comment. I'll move on from that. There's some valid points in there nonetheless. Do any other members have any points they wish to raise on the risk register? If not, we will thank the team for their work and look forward to the next report. Thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is the work of the internal audit and swap, which is item 7, and you have the report in front of us. Angie, are you going to take that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Angie Hooper, Principal Auditor, Swap Internal Audit Services. This is the third of our update reports for the 23-24 financial year. The highlights of this report are that we're offering a reasonable interim opinion. We haven't identified any significant corporate risks as part of our work. We have issued 3 limited assurance opinion reports since our last update report in September. The long outstanding actions has increased to 22 as at today. Since our last report, we've issued 3 limited assurance opinions, and the one-page reports for these can be found on our report, pages 7 to 9. And we will follow up the agreed actions using our normal process. In order to provide more up-to-date information, we will shortly be introducing an enhancement to the rolling plan dashboard, where we will include links to the final one-page reports from the completed tab, and this will enable members to read these reports as they are issued, rather than waiting for the committee report. With regards to the actions in the response to climate emergency audit, we continue to keep in contact with the Corporate Director, Transformation, Innovation and Digital and his team, and we will undertake another formal follow-up in the next few months. We have undertaken a follow-up of the premises health and safety audit and can report that 4 of the 7 outstanding actions have now been implemented, with revised implementation dates for the remaining 3. It is taking longer to complete the work required than was originally anticipated, but work is in progress to address all actions, and the new compliance team has had a positive impact. Moving on to the action tracker, the number of overdue actions has increased to 22 as at today. We have agreed revised implementation dates for the majority of these actions. We have noticed that in some recent audits, officers are agreeing fairly short implementation dates, which they then struggle to meet, and we then need to agree a revised date. Whilst it is pleasing to see that officers are keen to implement actions quickly, moving forwards, we will encourage them to be probably more realistic with the timescales. Thank you, and Sally and I are happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members? Mr. Roach.
Hi, thank you very much for your report. A couple of questions, if I may. The first is on the asset and property audit, which is where there are a number of actions that are in progress. And you've revised the timing of 3 of them, I think you said. Are any of those priority 1 actions that have been revised? Or are they all priority 2 and 3? Do you know?
Thank you. Yes, I think one of those is a priority 1 action, and the others are priority 2s.
So, I mean, in general, it should be unacceptable to revise timetables for priority 1 actions, I think, arising from internal audits, particularly given the significance that you attach to the risk associated with those priorities. So I wonder if there's a way we can flag those if they occur for our information and commentary. As I say, if we look at other priorities 2s and 3s, maybe there are valid reasons for those, but I think generally it should be unacceptable to revise the timetable, the actions for priority 1. Certainly in other organisations I've been a part of, that has been the practice. In a commercial enterprise, it's normally the practice that we really try to focus on keeping those priority 1 actions complete to the original timetable because of the risk associated with it. And if those are not achieved, if the original timetables are not achieved, there needs to be some compensating risk mitigation or management that is implemented in absence of the original action completed.
Yeah, we can provide that information in the future. We can include it in our reports. And I just wanted to say as well that the priority 1 action, it is in progress, the implementation work in that. So it's not like there's no work happening at all. So yeah, it is in progress.
Yes, thank you for that. Of course, whilst it's in progress, the risk is still in existence, and that's my point, really. If I may ask a second question, please. On your summary on page 26, you've got, let me just find that, on page 26, you have work done around transformation, some coverage, but there's no opinion. So can you please help us understand how we get a view of your perspective on how that transformation activity is going, and if it's managed and controlled effectively and is, likely to deliver its proposed outcome or value?
I'm happy to take that question. There are occasions when the audit work that we do is not assurance work, from which we deliver an assurance opinion, and that can be for a range of reasons. That could be advisory work. So if we're moving into an area that is fairly new, we might just provide some advice and guidance work. It could be around grant certification work that we do, of which there is quite a bit of that. In terms of transformation, we have got work on our forward plan in terms of looking at that, and that would be, at this stage, I would anticipate that being assurance work, if that is of reassurance to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
In fact, that was going to be a similar question for myself around transformation, understanding why there's no audit opinion on that, and that you explained that. However, the importance of the transformation programme to reduce the 12 million deficit is absolutely key. So if that's not delivered, there will be discretionary cuts here, too. That's the reality of it. So I would like to see us really get to grips and a programme of reviewing that, because I don't think even members understand what those transformation projects are. I think they need to be really out in the open, so we can be assured that they're being managed effectively. Are there any questions from other members? Okay. In that case, we accept the update. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And we move on to item 8, which is the use of covert surveillance, something we've covered once before, I believe. Mr. Eyre, you're going to lead on this?
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's Mark Eyre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance. I'm joined for this item this morning by James Fisher, who's the Council's Data Protection Officer. So just to briefly summarise the paper, There's an existing Dorset Council policy for the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or RIPA. Compliance with this Act is regulated by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. Essentially, RIPA relates to covert surveillance, so that's surveillance carried out without the knowledge of the individual that's subject to that surveillance. Just to be clear on RIPA legislation, it only applies to surveillance for preventing or detecting a criminal offence which would be punishable by a prison sentence of at least 6 months. And there's an approval process that needs to be followed in those cases, which includes sign-off by the Magistrates' Court. Just to highlight briefly an error actually in the report and the policy, which we will amend post-meeting, and that's that it should read 6 months, not 12, as currently within the paper. So that will also need to be amended at 2.2 in the policy. So apologies for that error. It's very rare that RIPA needs to be used. So to my knowledge, it's not been used since the formation of Dorset Council. Indeed, it's actually rare that any form of covert surveillance is necessary. We've used it once in the last 12 months for a fraud investigation, but this fell outside of RIPA itself. On last inspection by the regulator, they made a number of suggestions of areas that we should improve our policy and extend the wording within that. One of which was to include a light touch process for covert surveillance that falls outside of RIPA. So an example of that being the fraud investigation that I mentioned just a moment ago. So essentially building in that good practice of justifying why the surveillance is necessary, the extent of that surveillance and a time frame that would be undertaken within. And the approval form for that RIPA light process is included as an appendix to the report. Areas that could be deemed to include surveillance have moved on a lot since the original policy was put in place before Dorset Council came into existence, and that the regulator requested that we reflect within the policy is around the use of social media, so we have made that change. There's also a separate social media use policy that we've linked to within the policy. The points raised by the regulator have therefore been reflected within this revised policy that we present for the committee's approval today, and we will be rolling that out with a training regime to support that and to support those officers identified within the report as authorising officers. Another recommendation from the regulator was that we should be reporting to this committee on how the powers have been used. We referenced that briefly last year within our annual information governance report, and we would intend to use that same reporting mechanism for future reporting. As I said at the beginning, though, these powers are really rarely used. Hopefully you'll be happy to support approval of the revised policy, but myself and James will be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Legg.
Thank you. Robin Legg from Sherborne Rural. I'm happy to think that you've only used the powers once and it's been on the light touch basis. I think it would have been helpful to have that actually in the report, and I think if further reports are brought back on this subject, it would be useful just to know how RIPA has been used. I got slightly confused actually reading the social media policy on paragraph 5, where it starts by saying officers and members may use social media on a regular basis, both for work and personally. When joining a social media group in an official capacity, you should only do so by using a Dorset Council account and not a personal account. And then when you read on, it's all really about what officers might be doing in terms of looking at social media profiles of other people. I have to confess I'm a bit of an antique in this way. I haven't got a social media presence. So I don't actually get onto social media and use it and do things with it. But are you suggesting there that if a member, an elected member in their official capacity starts to trawl around through social media accounts, that we ought to only do so using a Dorset device and we ought to declare that we are, in some sense, acting in an official capacity? I'm not quite sure what we as elected members were being expected to do, those of us who actually make use of the facility.
Thank you for that question. Yes, the intention of the policy is that anyone acting in an official capacity whether that be a member or an officer, should be using social media in such a way that it's transparent. So if, for example, you were to join a group for the purposes of conducting your work for the council, then it should be clear to other members of the group that you are an officer of the council, or indeed an elected member of the council, which would probably be quite obvious, and you've joined in that capacity. However, of course, members have duties as elected members, which are separate to their official duties when they act on behalf of the council. So the policy isn't meant to try to restrict what members can do when they're not, when you're, for example, acting politically rather than carrying out official business for the council. So, does that hopefully that clarifies it? But
Well, it does. I mean, that's helpful. And if there is any need to put around a little note from elected members so that we understand the way we should approach these things. I mean, I'm thinking at the moment there's a large village in my area without a post box. There's 1,000 people live in the village, and the good old Royal Mail ripped the post box out in December, and nobody was able to post a letter. And I think the social media account for the village has actually been pretty vociferous on that topic. And if I decided to plunge in and say something about it, I was just wondering in what way I ought to do it. But I think what you're suggesting is that if I use a personal device and say things, then that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you.
I think it sounds like a bit of a minefield. Let's tread carefully. Councillor Baldwin.
Are you saying that if we are responding to things on social media as a Dorset elected member, that we have to report this to you in some way? I'm still not really clear where the line lies.
So, as an elected member, you'll be interacting with constituents on a regular basis. In your role as a councillor, as a representative, that's separate from when you're acting in an official capacity, carrying out work of the council. So when acting on behalf of the council, it is important that members, and in particular officers, are transparent with the public, so that people understand this person is conducting council business and not acting as a private citizen. So that's the intention of the policy, but it's not intended to constrain what you might do normally on social media as an elected member.
Come back on that, Councillor Borden.
Thank you. Yes. So, are you saying we just have to sort of be transparent and make it obvious when we're acting as a member, as opposed to just Joe Public also expressing an opinion? But if we are acting as Dorset Council, so for example, explaining Dorset's recent decision on the PSPO or something and expressing an opinion, do we actually have to report that to anyone to say that I've been interacting in the public? It's just to make sure that we're doing it in the right way.
Yes, it is very much about how you do it. It's not that you have to report it to us, to the council. We don't record that sort of thing on social media, of course. But there is one of the so there's how you interact with people. The policy is also concerned to prevent really officers of the council when carrying out their duties accidentally following a pattern of conduct which then falls into covert surveillance. So for example, if an officer was regularly viewing the social media profile of an individual without that individual's awareness, even though that social media profile might be open source data, there may be no restrictions on who can view it. If the council's regularly looking at that every week, then that becomes a form of surveillance. So the social media policy is about trying to make sure that when using social media, we're being transparent with people when we interact with them, that we are representing the council, and also to prevent that sort of accidental covert surveillance, where as I say, a pattern of conduct might inadvertently overstep and become covert surveillance, in which case the procedures under the RIPA policy have to be followed.
Yes, as I said, a bit of a minefield. I think I don't see that we all need to be particularly worried. I think it's more in terms of for members, under the code of conduct type things. If you how you behave and what capacity you're doing it in, I think is the thing you need to be mindful of, Councillor Batstone.
Yes, as someone who uses social media a lot to convey information to my ward, I'm presuming that if I were to do something and saying I am speaking formally as, for example, Chairman of the County Farms Liaison Panel, which is the only role I hold at the moment, I would need to make it absolutely clear that I was speaking in that capacity. The rest of my stuff does go out in a councillor, on a councillor Facebook page and whatever, and that I'm a councillor on the Town Council as well as on this authority. So what we're trying to say is if you're formally speaking on behalf of the council, that's one thing, making absolutely clear. If I'm doing as I'm doing at the moment, trying to explain to my residents why we're blocking off a road outside of my house and everyone else's house, I'm doing that, if you like, very much as an interested local party, but I'm not formally giving them a formal answer as chairman of the relevant committee. It is a bit of a minefield, as you say, but at least we try and make it clear when we are acting as the voice of the council. That would be the important point. And I may well be doing stuff on my own iPad rather than on this monster, which we don't get on terribly well, this machine and I. But it's about making absolutely clear when it's speaking for the council and when it's speaking as a member of the public, possibly interpreting some of or translating some of the actions of the council, but as a member of as a local interested resident.
Councillor Baldwin again.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm still not clear whether the advice would be to have an official Dorset Council account for all interactions on social media that were to do with Dorset Council, as opposed to our public account, because I just have one, let's say, Facebook account. It's just me. So sometimes I'm expressing a view on Dorset Council matters, but other times I'm not. I don't differentiate, although I think it's obvious from what I say. But it's not obvious in terms of the branding, if you like. And the other question was just so in the instance that you've mentioned about inadvertently getting caught up in perhaps accusations of surveillance by looking on other people's pages or looking at other groups, because I certainly look at other people's other groups. Would it be where do we go in the organisation to ask for advice? Because I can see how this could be misused by somebody accusing you of wrongdoing. So it'd just be wise to check with someone. Would that be you, or would that be the monitoring officer? Or
No. Jonathan Mayer, as monitoring officer, would be an appropriate point of contact. I'm happy to be approached by members if there were any questions as well. In general, it should be perfectly okay for a member to carry out all of their social media activity on one account. As good practice, I would recommend putting in your biography, if you're happy to do so, that you're an elected councillor, although you know that's at your discretion. And the key thing is that most of the activity you will be doing on social media will fall under your role as a representative of your constituents. It's a small part of your communications would be carrying out official business of the council, so speaking as the voice of the council. So when speaking as the voice of the council, it is that's when it's important to be transparent that you are speaking on behalf of Dorset Council.
Thank you. I mean, this policy will be reviewed in 3 years' time, as I understand it. Perhaps there's a little bit of confusion over that area, so maybe that's something that Jonathan may want to issue some advisory guidance. But if that was to take place, are members happy to accept as it is? And co-opted members, yep. Okay, thank you very much. Not as straightforward as we thought it might be. So next is managing unreasonable customer behaviour protocol. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Another report from me. So Mark Eyre, Service Manager for Assurance. So going back a little bit of time now, back to the meeting of the committee on the 9th of July 2021, and you received a corporate complaint report, and that incorporated the first version of the Council's unreasonable behaviours protocol. Essentially, the purpose of this protocol is how we manage vexatious complainants and contact, and in addition to that, any instances of aggression and actual or attempted violence. I think it's worth just making it clear that most customers that deal with the council do so with real respect when they're dealing with council workers and councillors equally. But there are rare occasions where that contact does need to be managed. The protocol is supported by a cautionary contacts style register, which is managed by an unreasonable behaviours panel, and that includes representation from the complaint service, from customer services, and the health and safety team. And actually, since the report was written, and a small change we will make to the policy post this meeting, is that we've strengthened that panel further with a member of the mental health team and also the ethnic diversity network. I chair that panel, and at the time of writing the report, there are 12 individuals named on the supporting schedule, so a really low number when appreciating the population of Dorset. We've made some amendments to the process, and that reflects really the learnings since that protocol was first put in place. And I'd like to hopefully get the committee's agreement to those protocol changes. So in terms of what's changed, the key learning since the original protocol was put in place is that we need to be clear and specific to the individual on what the behaviour is that has been determined to be unreasonable. So we've included an improved appeal process, which previously has been a little bit unclear. We've also included reference to councillors, including making sure that we contact ward councillors where an individual within the ward is to be added to that schedule, so that we can determine if any email diverts that may be deemed appropriate should also include contact with the councillor. I think the key thing is that we'll often look to manage those contacts via a single point of contact, one single email address, because otherwise it tends to be a little bit of a scattergun type approach. And I think we just need to make sure that even if that includes the elected members as well, that they still are not denied access to that elected representative. So the single point of contact enables one individual or group of individuals to monitor that email contact and then coordinate the response back. As I say, in terms of counsellor contact, that tends to be at the discretion of the individual counsellor as to whether they're included within that divert or their email address is excluded and email continues to go direct. We've also improved the mechanisms for adding and removing individuals and reviewing whether behaviour has improved and individuals will then be removed from the schedule if that improvement has been made within a 12-month period. I think that's probably the main points I was going to cover within the introduction. So again, I'll be quiet and open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Legg.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the policy is very clear on people who are abusive or violent or potentially violent, and it's important that that's flagged up to both elected members and to officers of the authority in order to ensure that they're protected. I think where it's less clear is on the issue of what you might categorise as vexatious people, people who've got a bee in their bonnet about something, people who are just a bloody nuisance, really. And I've got, let me put it this way. I've got somebody who's been on the list, certainly since 2019, because he was unhappy about a decision of Dorset County Council. And I've engaged with him, and I've had quite a useful conversation with him. I'm not sure he's still on the list. He's still aggrieved because he thinks the decision that was made was wrong. I think, actually, having looked at it in some detail over the last 4.5 years, I think he's probably right. And there was a very interesting conversation on Any Questions on the radio on Friday evening when they were talking about the post office and what the post office did wrong. And one of the panelists remarked that large organisations do tend to get into a kind of groupthink about things. They form an opinion about people, and then they just won't budge from that opinion that they formed. And my individual has got a gripe about the fact that his house was flooded. And the nub of the argument is whose drain was there first. His house was built in the late 18th century, and his view is that his drain was there first, and that when the Highway Authority came along in probably the 1950s and put some highway drains in, they broke into his system, and now he's connected to theirs. And the Highway Authority, back in the day when it was Dorset County Council, they took the view, you shouldn't be connected to our system. The fact that your house is flooded because the highway drain sometimes surcharges is your problem and not ours. Now, every time it rains heavily, he's terrified that there's going to be another flood of water into his property. And that's really the nub of it. And sometimes I think people become vexatious because we don't actually sit down and listen to them. And maybe we need a bit more subtlety in the way in which we approach some of these people who've got a bee in their bonnet about something, because if you think about it carefully, they might just have a point. So a bit more engagement, I think, with the people who've got a bee in their bonnet, and less engagement with the people who are potentially violent and abusive and very awkward and horrible people.
Thank you, Councillor. And again, as before, points well made. I guess a real key thing when we're looking at complaints such as ones you've mentioned then is that there will be an initial view provided by officers on the validity of that complaint. The individual will have the ability to escalate that through to the Ombudsman if they are not happy with that initial response. So the Ombudsman will provide that sort of external challenge to that view. I guess where we tend to find then is that in many instances, those cases that are determined to be vexatious, it will often be that the actual complaints process itself has become exhausted. We've put our view down, the Ombudsman's supported it or not supported it. At that sort of stage, it just tends to, sometimes we'll continue to get contact, and that's the point when would try to cut that contact off, and in some instances make the point that there's nothing further we can add to that particular that particular comment. So I think the point you made about making sure that there is that appropriate contact between the officer and the individual is a real key one, just to make sure that there is a clear understanding of it. But I think there does come a point where some action does need to be taken just to try and shut a particular issue down, because it can, when we get some elements of some vexatious complainants that can be sending sort of 10 plus emails to an individual officer on a daily basis, so it can get quite tricky.
Perhaps without getting into the individual case, are you happy with that response?
Only to say, by way of a follow-up, it got to the Ombudsman when it was still with Dorset County Council, and the Ombudsman's response was, well, you can take the council to court to resolve this. And of course, it's a David and Goliath fight, isn't it? Can you afford to bet the value of your house on taking the council to court? And most people aren't in that position, which is the position actually that quite a lot of the sub-postmasters got themselves into when they were trying to tackle the post office. They couldn't afford to take the post office on. You know, there we go.
Councillor Batstone. Okay.
Recognise the case that my colleague is discussing when I was chairman of council. I have a situation which is rather different, where we have someone who, for me, the difficulty is trying to explain to a very, very stressed person why they are going through the single point of contact process. And I don't think this is one that you can answer for me, but just be aware that it is very difficult not to make the matter worse by trying to explain why, yes, everything is going through, because you touched, the important thing you said earlier was the scattergun effect of the emails flying from individuals everywhere, and trying to pull that together and hoping that you will end up with something where you could have a different, a further view of it, not just simply making up our minds, blanket response. And the Ombudsman is not always an available or appropriate response. And yes, you can get into a situation where you're saying, no, it's about you taking legal action in your own right or whatever. So really trying to say, this is not simple. This is by no means simple. And we have a responsibility to our residents to make sure that we have a clear view of just what is going on, and don't just write them off.
I think, Chair, I think that's a really valid comment, and actually even the most vexatious complainants will often have a really valid point. So we need to always make sure that we are dealing with that complaint appropriately. It's just sometimes the single point of contact is the best means of actually managing that contact. If there's a valid complaint there, it will still get handled in the correct way.
Councillor Baldwin.
I was just wondering whether there's, I don't get a sense of it from the report, but in the Code of Conduct complaints, for example, there is a sense that politically elected members, there's kind of a higher barrier of proof needed, if you like, or evidence needed of, I don't know, bad behaviour or breaching the Code of Conduct. If it's a member of the public complaining about a councillor's behaviour, for example, it's not such a high barrier, whereas if it's a councillor complaining about a councillor, is there that sense in terms of dealing with the general public that there's a certain element of rough and tumble that's expected, and therefore they have this sort of rudeness, if you like, has to be much worse against us before we can complain, as opposed to a member of staff. Sorry, I haven't explained that very well, but you get where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's very rare that we will add people to that cautionary contacts schedule. So we will do what we can to try and sort of manage these behaviours before we go through that sort of element of process. So yeah, I think you're probably right in terms of that particular bar.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's obviously a point that's close to members' hearts, because we all have people that we've been dealing with. I have one who puts about 200 emails a year, has done since I've been elected on this authority, and the previous member, but does raise some quite valid points, you know, but can be difficult to manage because you don't have the time, you don't have a staff to deal with. If everyone behaved like that, you couldn't cope with it, and it is difficult. And it's sort of, members have to sort of self-police, and I think it's sort of common sense really applies. It's your own, what you accept, isn't it? But I think as a policy for the authority, it's obviously, as long as it's not abused, and I think it's sensible, I'm content with it. Is everyone happy to accept the policy as it is, and it will come up for review eventually? When's the review date? Is it the same as it 3 years ago?
I'm pretty sure it's, again, 3 years generally. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, well, happy with that, which takes me to the work programme, which you got in front of you for the March meeting. Some important, obviously, the Q3 financial report, which is a big one, and the 15th of April, the governance statement. Are we expecting any other things that we should be on there that haven't? No. See, Heather, do you wish to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just add on the 15th of April the external audit plan for 23-24, please, from Grant Thornton? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be added. Thank you very much. Okay, in that case, if there's no more comments regarding the work programme, it just calls me to say thank you very much for your attendance and some good debate here. And we'll see you at the next meeting. Oh, we've got one of it. Yep. Are there any urgent items or exempt business?
No urgent items, thank you.